Welcome, history fanatics, to Mrs. Heron's video playlist, where you will get the best of the best in social studies. Okay, we're beginning Unit 2, A Nation Divided, the Civil War. The goal is to explain the American Civil War and its causes, and the two chapters are Chapter 14 and 15, The Nation Divided and the Civil War.
Here he addresses the court that would sentence him to hang.
In the first place, I deny everything but what I have all along admitted. The design on my part to free the slaves. Had I so interfered in behalf of the rich, powerful, the intelligent, the so-called great, or any of that class, and suffered and sacrificed what I have in this interference, it would have been all right. And every man in this courtroom would have deemed it an act worthy of reward rather than punishment. I believe that to have interfered, as I have done, as I have always freely admitted I have done, was not wrong, but right. Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice, and mingle my blood with the blood of my children, and with the blood of millions in this slave country, whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit. So let it be done.
The speech you just witnessed was written in 1859 by a man named John Brown. It was the result of a controversial piece of legislature passed in 1854. This act was called the Kansas-Nebraska Act, first proposed by Senator Stephen Douglas. Now, Douglas had hoped that if he built a railroad that traveled through the land gained from the Louisiana Purchase, that he would generate business and settlement in the West. He also thought that such a maneuver could benefit business and economy in his own home state of Illinois. He proposed an act that would split the land into two territories, the Kansas Territory and the Nebraska Territory. The issue was that he needed support from the southern states to pass this act. Thus, he added popular sovereignty into his act, essentially eliminating the progress made by the Missouri Compromise. The North was furious and they felt betrayed, and the South granted Douglas their undying support. So when the act passed, people began to flood into the territories from both northern and southern states in an attempt to have the most people from their side in each territory. In Kansas, this was likely the first case of mass voter fraud in history. Citizens of Missouri crossed state lines to vote, and then returned home afterwards. Kansas thus became a slave state due to illegal voting by non-citizens. It resulted in 8,000 votes being cast in a state that really only had 3,000 residents. And yet again, the North felt cheated and angry. Northern settlers refused to adopt the outcome, and they began to enforce their own law in Kansas. They would often forcibly remove slave catchers and Southerners from their towns. Southern settlers were equally insulted and began to torture Northern citizens. Kansas quickly earned the name Bleeding Kansas due to the all-out war happening in the territory. The violence became so severe that it eventually landed in the United States Supreme Court, where an abolitionist senator from Massachusetts named Charles Sumner was bludgeoned with a cane until he was bloody and unconscious on the ground by fellow Senator Preston Brooks. Northerners were astonished as to how violent the issue had become and felt even stronger about the brutality of slavery. But Southerners garnished Brooks as a hero for their cause, and they sent him hundreds of canes to show their support for what he had done. Then, an abolitionist from Connecticut did something that would test the ideals of both sides. This man was John Brown. His speech was the speech you listened to earlier, and it was the last one he gave before he was hanged for murder, terrorism, treason, among other things. In May of 1855, he and his 3 sons attacked and murdered 5 pro-slavery residents in a settlement near an area called Pottawatomie Creek. He claimed that divine messages from God were his inspiration. Afterwards, he fled to Kansas and returned to New England, and Northerners rejoiced and felt a small victory had been made. They revered him as a hero. Southerners thought that he was a terrorist and he should be hanged. However, this was not the last that the nation would hear of John Brown. For the next 4 years, he began to plan a raid on an armory of weapons at Harper's Ferry in Virginia. He wanted to seize all of the weapons and provide Southern slaves with the weapons to begin a revolt in the South. He and a small group of supporters were able to overthrow the town and the armory briefly. However, when a Union colonel named Robert E. Lee caught wind of the attack, he surrounded Brown and his men. 10 of Brown's men were killed while trying to escape. Brown was captured and sentenced to death for this raid. On December 2nd of 1859, Brown was hung. The North mourned his death by ringing church bells from state to state. The South felt like Northerners were celebrating a terrorist and a murderer.